Jamen, goddag og velkommen til her til CURAIT's webinar. Så fremt at I godt kunne tænke jer at deltage med en kommentar eller med en bemærkning, eller I ønsker at sige et eller andet, så meget gerne skriv det i chatten, så skal vi nok tage det frem der. I dag der byder vi velkommen til Sophos, og i dag der skal vi snakke lidt omkring, jamen, hvordan kan man forebygge et hackerangreb. Og i den forbindelse, der har vi jo inviteret Per Søderqvist ind fra Sophos. Og Per, han er en sales engineer fra Sophos, som er ansvarlig for deres sikkerhed. Han har blandt andet været ansvarlig for udvikling af IT-strategier for større virksomheder og implementering, blandt andet ude hos kunder, som at hjælpe partnere med at få bygget en IT-sikkerhedsforretning op. Per, han har over 15 års erfaring og en udvidet ekspertise i IT-sikkerhed. Så han ved faktisk rigtig meget omkring IT-sikkerhed, så jeg glæder mig meget til at høre, hvad det er, han skal fortælle lidt om i dag. Af hensyn til i dag, så vil vi gøre det på engelsk, da Per han er fra Sverige. Så for at være sikker på, at vi forstår det meste af, hvad han siger, så får Per lov til at gøre det på engelsk. Er du med på den, Per?
Yes.
Ja, men jeg tænker, skal vi ikke börja då?
Yes.
2 sekunder.
Let's start. I'll share my screen here. 1 second. And you can just confirm that you're able to see my screen. Hopefully. So, yes, I'll start. Well, hello everyone. First of all, I'd just like to really say thank you for CURAIT for arranging this webinar. So, my name is Per Söderqvist. I'm the technical person at Sophos, covering the Nordics. Been with Sophos for a little bit more than 7 years, so it has been an extremely interesting journey, and especially around the topic that I will be covering today. There's been a lot of things happening in kind of the threat landscape. So my plan for today's session is really to, first of all, talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of the threat landscape. And then I'll go into more of a live demonstration, show you kind of how a scenario or how an attack could actually play out. And after that, I will talk a little bit more about kind of how to think when protecting against these more kind of advanced threats. So that's my idea. If you have any questions, I'll be monitoring the chat. I'll take some time in the end as well to answer any questions that you might have. But as soon as you get a question, just type it in the chat. I'll address that in the end of the session. Before I begin, I also wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what my experience for 2020 has been so far. So it has been quite of a dramatic year, if I put it like that. So in terms of IT security, what we've seen is really, first of all, a lot of companies just before the summer, they were really rushing to make sure that everyone was able to work from home or from coffee shops or from their car. And one thing that we noticed was that, well, most companies that actually kind of went into this direction of putting their entire workforce working from home kind of skipped out a little bit on the security aspect. And this is definitely something we've noticed, especially after summers when a lot of companies have reached out to us and kind of asked us to help out and look through how they can ensure that both everyone can be able to work from home, but also in a secure manner. My own personal experience with working from home, I really like this video, which is kind of a good illustration. So first of all, it sounded quite nice to be able to work from home. I have 3 small kids, so you might hear some screams in the background. But I think this video captures it quite well, how challenging it can actually be to work from home. One thing that we've also noticed is that the criminals, they've, of course, like always, used any type of uncertainty that's going on in the world. And this COVID-19 is no different. So this is just an example, kind of some telemetry of what our Sophos labs have seen in terms of how many spams have been associated with trying to trick people, how many domains that have been registered, and so on. But one thing that I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about is what we're seeing on the threat landscape side. So before I begin, I just want to kind of differentiate a little bit between two different types of attacks that we're seeing. So commonly, most people are familiar with the kind of category of cyber attacks that falls under the category of spray and pray. These are the types of attacks that you probably at some point or another seen yourself. A spam message with some kind of instructions that you should click on some link, download some attachment. And what would happen is if you, for example, download that attachment, they would encourage you to enable the macro in that document, and then you would get infected with ransomware. So, like I said, these are the types of attacks that most of us are familiar with. But the new type of attacks that we're seeing a huge increase in is the category of advanced persistent threats. So these are the more targeted types of attacks where the criminals will target one individual organization, usually with a combination of automation and basically hackers using that information that is collected to them automatically, and then they will manually go in and try to do as much damage as possible so that they can basically get as much extortion or ransom as possible from that organization. And traditionally, this is something that we've only, if I go back like 10 years, this was something that we only saw in bigger organizations. But lately, we've also started to see this for a lot smaller organizations as well. And it's really a huge concern in terms of how they are operating and how well organized the criminal networks actually are. So I thought I would go through that a little bit. One thing that I also want to highlight a little bit is still today, so this is probably nothing new for most of you, but still today, email is one of the more common methods, which is kind of the first stage of an attack like this. They will try to use social engineering to lure an employee to do something that they shouldn't do, and then they'll get a foothold into that organization, and then they will continue that attack. So there's a lot of things that can be addressed on this particular side. So I'll cover that as well in the end of my presentation. But I thought I would kind of go through the traditional. So Lockheed Martin has basically done a presentation of how 7 stages of an advanced persistent threat might look like. So one of the first thing that we're commonly seeing is that they will start with the reconnaissance part, where they will harvest email addresses, they will collect as much information as possible about one organization. And like I said before, most of the time we're seeing that this stage is actually automated, meaning that they have tool sets that will do this automatically. Will collect information about organizations, they will find vulnerabilities within that organization and try to target that. And one trend that we've also seen is that they're actually kind of overwhelmed with the information that they're getting. So there's a lot of different resources online that is used to be able to collect this information. The second thing, the stage 2 in the stage of an advanced persistent threat is the weaponization. This is where basically they've collected a bunch of vulnerabilities. They'll see how they are going to be able to exploit that and basically deliver it into a payload into that organization. So just some examples of different tools that are available. So different types of TCP scanners. They will use social networking, Kali Linux, which is a Linux distribution mainly used by both actually criminals, but also for pen testers to help out organizations to kind of check on their security. So once they've done that, they will deliver. So the stage 3 is really the delivery phase. This is when they will take this weaponization bundle and deliver it to the victim. And like I said, most of the time, still today, this is done via email. So this is where this is actually stage 3 is really the first time that you can start to kind of reactively look at protection and how to defend against this. So the stage 4 is the exploitation. This is where the vulnerability to execute code on the victim's machine. Again, using social engineering to get the user to click on a link, opening up an attachment, or do basically a malicious behavior that will get that computer infected. And this is really an important message that I'll also talk a little bit about in the end. But understanding that you are the weakest link is really important in terms of how we can protect against this. Helping end users to be able to kind of pick up on signs that this might not be legitimate, not clicking on every single link, not opening up every document. So it's an extremely important aspect. And traditionally, security, or IT security especially, has been very much of a reactive approach. And a lot of organizations needs to start to think more proactively. How can we educate our end users to help us to defend against these threats? And then we move on to the stage 5, which is the installation piece. This is basically when the malware is installed on the asset. Then creating persistence, establishing a backdoor into that organization, and then laterally move across that network. Because this is really a huge difference between kind of the spray and pray type of scenario where they're targeting, well, they're sending out a bunch of different spam, hoping as many as possible, click on that link. The difference between that and a more of an advanced or a targeted type of attack is really that the end goal is not just to infect one computer within that organization. It's really to laterally move across that network, infecting as many endpoints as possible, stealing information, and then when they have a huge majority of that organization compromised, they will strike. So, for example, executing the malware, the ransomware that encrypts all their files. That way, they've created as much damage as they possibly can, and there's also a higher likelihood that that organization is gonna choose to actually pay the ransom to get access back to their infrastructure and their data. So I thought that I would do a quick demonstration of a scenario like this. So I have with me my demo environment, so I'll show that really quickly. So here we have a Windows 10 computer. So just like any Windows 10 computer, however, this particular Windows 10 computer doesn't have any protection installed on it. Besides that computer, I also have a Kali Linux. Like I mentioned before, this is a distribution of Linux that's commonly being used both by the criminals, but also by pen testers. And the thing with Kali Linux is that it comes with a set of tools that can be used to create these types of attacks. So I thought I would just show you one very simplistic scenario, but kind of showing you how this could actually look like. So in this particular scenario, what we've seen here is that, like I said, most of the time it starts with an email. So here we see that a user has received an email, Office 365 migration. They're encouraging that user to click on this link, log in with your credentials, download a specific file and run it. So a very simplistic type of attack, but still a very plausible scenario. So the user clicks on the link. We'll take them through a Microsoft sign-in page. Now, there are a few signs here that this might not be legitimate. Like, for example, it says up here, not secure. And this actually is quite important because there are signs. If you hover over the links, or if you have a closer look, you'll see that, okay, there are a few telltale signs that shows me that this is actually not a legitimate website. But if I look just from my own experience, so I've tried this out on several organizations. I also encourage everyone on this call to try this out on their own employees, just to kind of find out where are our level of knowledge actually at this moment. So the scary part is that a lot of people would actually fall for this. So they would put in their email address and their password, and then they would click on sign in. And like I said, this will, like it said in the email, it will say that it has this launcher.hta file, and the user is encouraged to actually run that file. And what happens now, if I go to the Kali Linux machine, you'll shortly start to see that what we're doing here is we're establishing a backdoor into that Windows 10 computer. So what happened here is that you can see session 1 opened to this computer, and this is where I can basically start to do a lot of things on this Windows 10 computer. So first of all, if I start to interact with that session, I can do, I have my cheat sheet with me here as well, but one example is I can SPA, and then I can do a screen grab, so I can basically take a screenshot of that Windows 10 computer. So you can see here that I have a backdoor into this Windows 10 computer, and I can take a screenshot. I could do other things as well. I could take the web camera and take a photo from the web camera. And I can do a lot of different things right now when I have this backdoor into this computer. But like I mentioned, usually this Windows 10 computer is not their final goal. Usually what they would like to do is kind of laterally move from this Windows 10 computer to other computers in the network. So one of the tasks that they normally do is that they would actually try to steal the credentials from this computer. So there's a lot of different methods to do that. You can upload files to this computer. You can open up a shell and basically start to download all the data that's accessible from this computer. And again, just to kind of prove my point, so if I, for example, open up notepad.exe, you can see if I go back to the Windows 10 computer, I have full access to this computer. So, and like I mentioned, usually this is not their end goal. They commonly want to laterally move from this Windows 10 computers to other computers in the network. Another scenario that I also wanted to show really quickly is how ransomware tends to behave. So one thing that you might see here is that on this Windows 10 computer that's currently not protected by anything, I also have a file share and a bunch of different files on this file share. And this file share is actually located on this Windows 2016 server. This Windows 2016 server actually uses Sophos endpoint protection. So I'll open that up here. And you can see that one thing that I've enabled here is also a feature within our endpoint protection called ransomware detection. So the ransomware detection capability within our server protection does not only have the capabilities of detecting locally ran ransomware, but it can also detect if a ransomware is running remotely. And this is a very common method that ransomware will tend to use. They will not just try to encrypt all the files locally on that endpoint, but it will also try to reach out to any file shares and encrypt all the data on that as well. So if I go back to my Windows 10 computer, so I've received another email. I'm a very busy user here. And you can see that I have an attachment here, a Word document. I'm basically encouraged to open this document. And when I do, I also get the question to enable the content. And this is normally a very basic type of attack. So the user clicks on enable content. What will happen is ransomware will start to run in the background. And if I go back to this server, you can start to see that there's a few interesting things that has happened. First of all, we can start to see that there's some new files in this file share. So this was actually the ransomware running on this against this server. And you can also see here that the server endpoint agent on the server itself was able to block this remote attack. And another feature that our ransomware detection also contains is the ability to actually read back the original file in the case that a file was encrypted. So in this particular scenario, it actually managed to encrypt this file, and this file. But thanks to having Sophos installed, we were able to read back the original file, block the attack, and stop all communication coming from that particular client against this server. Another really important part here is, of course, also having the ability to be able to see what's happening. So I'll go back to the central management part. I'll talk about this a little bit later as well. So we can see here in central management that I just got a detection for a remotely run ransomware. So if I want to know more about this particular event, I can go in and understand, okay, which files did this particular ransomware try to target? Where did this attack actually come from? And get all this information. Again, this is really important information, especially if you want to be able to work more proactively against defending against these types of threats in the future. So I'll move back to the presentation and just talk a little bit more about some examples that we've actually seen in the wild. So one extremely frightening case of this was in Finland very recently, where the psychotherapy center got hit by one of these more advanced types of attacks, or a targeted type of attack. And in this particular scenario, the criminals were able to collect over 40,000 patient records that were held as ransom. And just like it says, I can't agree more, but it's seriously a really cowardly type of attack. And it kind of shows how dangerous these types of attacks has become. So not only will they just try to encrypt and hold your data ransomware that way, but they will also steal your data and say, if you don't pay up, not only will you not get access back to your data, but we will also publish any data that we've actually stolen from you. So what happened in this particular scenario was that basically this organization in Finland said, no, we're not going to pay for that. So what the criminals then did instead was, okay, then we're going to start to publish all that information, but we're going to reach out to the individual people and say that you can pay between 200 and 500 euros in bitcoins, and then you will not, your data will not be released. So again, very, very scary type of scenario, and I just feel very, very bad for the people that have kind of confided in this. So it's very scary. And this is a screenshot of one of these types of ransomwares that, just as an example, but it's called the Ragnar Locker. And this behaves like I mentioned before. Like it starts with just collecting as much data as possible from that organization. So you can see here under attention, we have downloaded more than 10 terabytes of data from your file servers. And again, if you don't pay, not only will you not get back your access to your data, but we will then either sell it off to interested parties or publish it. And one other thing that I also want to mention that has become extremely popular from the criminal networks that are performing these types of attacks is really that kind of the last stage of the attack to cover their traces. What they tend to do is running the ransomware to basically cover any tracks that they might have left before they've stolen all that data. And I kind of want to go back to this perception, because a lot of companies and organizations might think, well, honestly, we don't have any valuable data, so why would we be a target? And this is the perception that most organizations actually have. But there's an important lesson to be learned here, that there really isn't any organization that is too small for these types of attacks. The criminals, they will take their time. If they find a vulnerability through their automated type of scenario, they will collect in information about, this organization is vulnerable against this particular attack, and they find 100 other organizations that are vulnerable against this same scenario. They will run this against all the 100 organizations and hope that 10 of them choose to pay. So there are a few lessons here. One of the important things to understand as well is that they'll try to, as much as possible, live off the land. So an important lesson here is that if you do they want to, of course, go undetected for as long as possible. So they have the ability to laterally move across that organization and infect as many computers and servers as possible. I've talked about this several times, but it's an important piece here, that it usually starts with an automated compromise, but then it's led by this human-led farming. The hackers will actually then start to work on this. Another important thing here is as well that backups are usually compromised. They will stay in the network. I've seen this several times where they've managed to get a foothold into one organization. They will take their time. So I've seen the scenarios where they spent weeks at a time within or having access to that organization's network. And this is kind of showing that they want to, again, laterally move, but also make sure that any way that that organization has to recover from that attack, that they are able to actually compromise that. And another thing that's also important is that understanding that your organization might have connections into third-party vendors or supply chains, or you might have consultation from other organizations. Checking what type of access would that organization have into my network. So I wanted to end there with kind of the what we're seeing in terms of the threat landscape, and move really quickly into a little bit more on what we're doing at Sophos and how we can help to basically detect these types of scenarios or these types of attacks and help organizations to stay protected. So just for you that aren't aware, so I logged into Sophos Central just to show you that alert, but it's a really important piece in our portfolio. So this is really the central management part. You can see the products that you can manage from within Sophos Central. So you have this firewall, you have the endpoint protection, and a bunch of other solutions as well. Another thing that's also really important is the Sophos Labs. So the Sophos Labs team is really helping to push out and protect against different types of threats across different segments. So if it's a network threat for the firewall side, or if it's an endpoint threat against Sophos endpoint attacks. We're also leveraging artificial intelligence, and this has become more and more of an important piece in terms of how we can protect against these types of threats. And we also have the data lake. This is where we can collect all the information from all the individual products. And again, using artificial intelligence just to kind of reduce all the noise and present all the relevant things so that you can easily filter out, okay, this is what I actually need to look into, what's going on, and make sure that you're prioritizing your time as best as possible. So one example of how we're using artificial intelligence, I had this video, just wanted to quickly show you, but it's a really interesting kind of approach. So one thing that you might be aware of, but or might have heard of, is kind of the CEO frauds, where they're sending an email to a person and trying to get them to basically do a money transfer, which is a very common method. One thing that our artificial intelligence or data science team has been working on is a way to actually not just look at where the email is coming from, but more investigating what is actually the content of the email. And it's really impressive to see how the deep learning algorithm can just read through an email, detect that, okay, there are a few things within this email that is a bit suspicious, and we can then use this to flag and make that the receiver of this email aware of, well, something is a little bit strange. So I encourage everyone to have a look at that. We actually have a website, I can show you that really quickly, called ai.sophos.com. So it should be easy to remember, but this is where we're basically collecting all the information about how we're leveraging artificial intelligence to be able to protect against these more advanced threats. But I also want to kind of highlight that there's a lot of different things that you can actually do to prevent or help to reduce the attack surface as much as possible. And I really encourage you to also talk to CURAit. They will be able to kind of go into this a little bit deeper. So this is very high level, but there are definitely a lot of things you can do. Another concept that I also like to talk about, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I see that I'm running a little bit short on time, but it's the defense in depth part, where basically we're seeing this becoming more and more popular, where organizations, they will try to see, okay, first scenario, let's say that a criminal network manages to get a foothold within our organization. What would they actually be able to, what type of data would they be able to encrypt or steal from that endpoint? And also kind of think worst case scenario, how could we do if let's say most of our infrastructure went down? How can we easily recover from that? So again, a really kind of interesting approach on IT security. So I thought I would do a very quick demo again, or a little bit more on Sophos Central, but there's one thing that I wanted to quickly highlight, and that is the one important aspect, like I mentioned before, is that we're seeing a lot of organizations relying on more of a reactive type of approach when it comes to securing their infrastructure. But we're providing also within Sophos Central a lot of different means to be able to work more proactively. And one way of doing that is using our threat analysis center. So every time there's an attack, what we'll do is we'll collect all the information about that particular attack, and we will also present that for you. So you can actually go in and get a better understanding of what actually occurred during this attack. So here's an example of a ransomware attack. You can see a very high level what occurred. You can see the root cause. So it came in via Outlook. The beacon, this was basically when we triggered and said something is wrong. This was when malware.exe executed, and we detected that and cleaned it up. But if you scroll down here, you can also see more information about, okay, which document actually came in, which so in this particular scenario was Winward who read that particular file that came in via Outlook, and then it executed malware.exe. And maybe I want to know more about malware.exe. So I might want to know how was it executed, which command line was used. Maybe I want to run this against VirusTotal to see what other vendors are thinking about this particular file. Or even more importantly, maybe I want to do a search to be able to see, does this particular file reside in any other on any other clients or servers in my organization? So I can just do a quick search for this particular malware.exe and see if it resides on any other computers or servers. Another really important thing, again, moving back to this artificial intelligence piece, but here we will also see threat indicators. So if there's something suspicious going on in an organization, you'll quickly see that, okay, we've seen one more event happening. Maybe you want to know more about this. How did this actually come into our network? What has it done? And things in that nature. And you can also use live discovery to be able to find out more. So if I want to do queries against an endpoint, I can use the live discovery piece to find out more information about which processes are running on the devices. I want to know more about the CPU information because one user is complaining that their computer is running slow. So all that information, I can just select which computers I want to run this query against, and then I can just select run query. So it's just an easy tool to be able to create your own types of questions. You can edit this, of course, and run it. Now, I understand that this is very high level, and I also want to kind of talk a little bit or very shortly about that. I understand that there is, of course, some knowledge needed to be able to understand some of this information that I've been talking about. But there's also a way to actually outsource this to more of a, we call it MTR, where you have a security operations center helping to analyze and monitoring your network 24/7. Another part of the more proactive type of defense is a product that we call phish threat. And this is where you can simulate a phishing campaign. So just like I showed you with the Office 365, you can actually create that yourself. So you can create a new campaign, I'll just call it demo. I'll take credential harvesting. So here you can see that we already provide you with a set of kind of attacks. So let's say I want to try out the Facebook security issue. This is what the email will look like when it's being sent out to my users. And then you can say, okay, this is the one I want to use. I maybe also want to connect the training to this. Either I have my own trainings or I can use the already built-in ones. And then I can customize the entire attack. So I can change all the information. Maybe I want to change the language to Danish, the attack landing page, so I can change the look and feel of that. And then I can select which users would I like to try this on. So I can say, okay, I would like to try this on this particular user. And then you can also say at which particular time would you actually like to try it. So I'll just launch it immediately to see. And then you can go back and you can monitor and see, you can follow kind of how many emails were sent, how many opened up how many users clicked on the link, how many users reported the threat. So we also provide you with an Outlook add-in so you can actually give the end users the possibility to report something that looks suspicious. And then how many has finished the training. So it's just a very easy tool to kind of get a high-level sense of where are we at right now. So that was very quickly my presentation. So I can see there's one question in the chat window from Christian. How fast does Sophos endpoint protection detect and shut down a ransomware attack on a file server? So normally we have a behavior analysis engine running on the server side. So if it's one of the more obvious types of ransomwares, we'll detect it before we even allow it to actually run. In some scenarios, it might take a few files until we're able to detect that it's actually running. But then again, we have that possibility to actually read back those files that got encrypted during the attack. So it's an important piece in the sense. But in a lot of scenarios, you're able to block it immediately. Any other questions? Okay, so if there are any questions, then of course you can contact myself through CURAit. I'm definitely here to help out. So.
Tak så mycket, Per.
Yes, welcome.
Tak for præsentationen, Per. Og tak fordi du vil være med. Hvis du lige lukker din stop sharing her.
Ja.
Kan du? Så kan jeg også her. Jamen, tak fordi I vil deltage i vores webinar her omkring, hvordan man forebygger et hackerangreb sammen med Sophos. Og som I kan høre, så er der utrolig mange ting, man skal være opmærksom på i forhold til at beskytte sin virksomhed. Nu ved jeg ikke, om I alle sammen kender CURAit, men bare sådan kort, hvem er CURAit? Jamen, CURAit er en IT-virksomhed, der selvfølgelig sørger for at hjælpe kunderne med rådgivning, implementering og vedligeholdelse, og det er i alle faser af jeres IT-infrastruktur. Og vi designer selvfølgelig alle løsninger ud fra kundernes behov. Og nogle af de ting, som vi selvfølgelig hjælper med, det er jo blandt andet inden for server storage og workstations, netværk, backup og disaster recovery, og så selvfølgelig sikkerhed. Og som vi kunne høre på Per, jamen så er der ekstremt mange ting, som man skal være opmærksom på. Og ikke nok med det, Sophos har bygget et rigtig godt univers op, som de kalder for synchronized security, som Per var lidt inde på. Så hvis det er noget, I kunne tænke jer at høre lidt mere om, jamen så er I meget velkommen til at tage fat i os. Vi arbejder til dagligt med sikkerhed. Vi taler selvfølgelig om sikkerhed, antivirus, som Per har været lidt inde på, firewall, mailscanning, MFA, identity management, penetrationstesting, sårbarhedsanalyse og auditering. Og det er nogle af de begreber, som vi er vant til at arbejde sammen med til dagligt sammen med vores kunder. Så endelig, hvis der er noget, så tag fat i os. Og så vil vi meget gerne hjælpe jer. Og ellers vil vi bare sige tak, fordi I gad at deltage. Og igen, hvis der er noget, I kunne tænke jer at vide, tag fat i os. Det er nogle af de kunder, som vi har et samarbejde med i det daglige omkring nogle af de ting, som Per har talt om. Og det var sådan set alt for os. Jeg håber, I får en god dag. Og hvis vi ikke snakker, så glædelig jul og godt nytår. Hej.